Toads Profesh. Let's try that again. Hi, I'm Alistair. How are you doing? Those of you who probably haven't seen my face before may well have heard my voice. I am the voice of Peter Lucas, the unsung hero of the Magnus Archive Season 4, and if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you at a very affordable price. Let me walk you through what we're going to be doing. Hey folks, how's it going? Let me walk you through what we're going to be doing across the course of the next couple of hours. This is really what I do every Wednesday night. It's a bedtime story, and it being me, and given that my day job is hosting a horror fiction podcast, it's not a comforting bedtime story a lot of the time. Don't worry, there will be a content warning, and don't worry, in this instance, the content warning is very, very mild indeed. But what we're going to do is have an opening monologue, which I'll jump into in a minute, which is basically a way for me to calm down and get my voice working at the right kind of speed, and you to get situated. So grab some food, grab some water, take any meds you might need, get comfy, all that kind of stuff. Then we'll just do a little bit about what's going on with me this week, and I'll talk to you about what the story is. And then I'll tell you a scary story. Sound good? Cool. Now, the opening monologue, which this week comes to us from one of the single greatest books in human history. Let's see. This is written by Nick Crowley, who is a brain that this planet bluntly does not deserve. I will put a link to all his stuff in the show notes. But this all came from a Twitter thread where he basically invented a lot of video games that shouldn't exist, or don't exist and shouldn't, and really should. And yeah, some of them do now. 39. Lore of the Jungle 2, Pride and Prejudice. Although the Lore of the Jungle series of all-animal legal RPGs would later become famous for its run of titles on the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS, the first two games in the series have been largely and sadly forgotten, due to having been released on the Bandai WonderSwan. This is a shame, as many connoisseurs of the series considered the second game to have been the most charming of all of them. Following on from LOTJ Bear Den of Proof, it continued the story of elephant defense attorney Sally Longnose and her quest to acquit various zoo animals accused of wrongdoing. As its name suggests, Pride and Prejudice presented a brand new challenge for Sally as she came up against a jury of incredibly bigoted lions. The lions were utter bastards and instantly assumed guilt of any non-feline animal, meaning an uphill struggle for Sally's clientele of amphibians, birds, and insects. To make matters worse, this game saw the introduction of Judge Stripey, a supercilious tiger who would later become a fixture in the series, and who constantly pandered to the jury's outrageous behaviour. In the game's first case, where Sally defends a salamander accused of arson, the jury begins literally roaring during the examination of the first witness, and Stripey just laughs before frisbeeing a stake across the courtroom to encourage them. The trial collapses, and the client is hurled straight into a well, casting Sally into a deep sadness. But you know what they say about elephants. They never let lions take the piss in a court of law. As such, the rest of the game alternated between standard courtroom scenes and nighttime investigations, in which Sally discovered more about the jury's members in order to play on their weaknesses during upcoming trials. When you finally unlocked the dialogue options capable of shutting the lions right up, the satisfaction was enough to make you trumpet for the protagonist herself. And Nate has kindly included a short advertising jingle here, which is set to the tune of Englishman in New York by Sting. Whoa, you're an elephant. You're a legal elephant. You're an elephant in a cartoon animal legal procedural. Okay. Pride and Prejudice deserves to be remembered as Sally Longnose's standout outing. It's fun, it's easy to follow, and while it teaches you even less about animals than it does about the law, it's deeply fulfilling to play through. And that brings us to Car Sleuth. On paper, the forthcoming Car Sleuth looks like a smashing concept. Brought for you as a gift by a mischievous friend, it would present itself as a top-of-the-range sat-nav app. See? Going well. Promising to unlock the mysteries of the road, with voice work provided by a stable of A-list actors. And for several months. this is exactly what it would do. Give you precise and useful driving directions with occasional vocal flourishes from its stellar cast. But then at some point when you least expected it, it would strike. At the next junction, turn right, it might say, before pausing ominously and adding, unless, of course, you want to know what happened to poor Tammy, in which case you should turn left. Being an inquisitive and adventurous person, you would, of course, turn left, at which point the app would begin layering the story of an unfolding mystery over the directions to your destination. The type of adventure would be selected based on context: urban fantasy for central London, neo-noir for the inner city, and midsummer murders type shit for the countryside. There would be pretend chases, other narrators butting in with twists, and a crime that seemed insoluble, but which would unravel into a satisfying denouement as you pulled into your destination. Again, all sounds great on paper, right? Yeah, consider it in practice. You're herring around a godforsaken tangle of rural lanes, kids hollering in the backseat as your cousin's wedding starts 3 miles away. You glance frantically at your watch, but Diogenes is just sitting on screen with his balls out in no mood to help. Then your sat-nav interjects with "carry straight on at the next roundabout" in the voice of Tom Hardy, and you sigh in relief. But then, as you accelerate in line with the arrows on screen, Jeremy Irons pipes up with, "Of course, that's what he wants you to think. I think you should turn right." You grimace in sudden rage. This is no time for a mystery. "Where's the church, Irons?" You roar and smack your hand on the wheel. But it's no use. The sat-nav unit just chuckles darkly, saying, "I'm sure you'd love to know. Nevertheless," but whatever it says next is lost as it does so from the base of a roadside hedge, where it lies, with a cracked screen. Verdict: a splendid concept with the potential to backfire just horribly. We foresee huge initial sales for Sleuth before a record number of binnings as real life emerges as the villain of the piece. Both taken from 100 of the best video games that never existed by Nate Crowley. The link will be in the Twitter thread I'll put up after the fact.
And I put it in the chat as well.
Yes, beautifully described as the world's first post-truth gaming book. Excellent. My partner Marguerite is also on the stream today.
Hi, everybody!
So, what's new with me? Well, we're in the run up to Worldcon at the moment, which begins this coming Tuesday in New Zealand. New Zealand, in this instance, is a place I am not, but I will be attending Worldcon via the power of the internet. Now that means, of course, that 2 things present themselves as options to me. The first one is that I can attend a small amount of this show, and the second one is I can not sleep for a week. Yeah, it's probably going to be the first. One of the reasons why we're attending digitally anyway is... Thank you. One of the reasons we're attending digitally anyway is that I'm a Hugo finalist this year. I'm a finalist for Best Fan Writer for the work I do on places like my newsletter, The Full Lead. And I'm also a finalist as part of the presenting team for Escape Pod, which is one of the 4 podcasts that we own. And I'm really, really happy about it, actually. It's a massive honour, and it's tremendously exciting, and it's also huge amounts of work, but, you know, we've actually bought fancy pyjamas for the ceremony, because the ceremony starts at midnight on, is it Friday?
It is Friday night, Saturday morning.
Friday night, Saturday morning. We actually have fancy formal evening wear pyjamas, and it's going to be brilliant. And who knows, I might win, I might not, but I get this awesome shiny little rocket pin regardless, and I've got more than one of those now. That's pretty cool.
Do you want me to go get the tiny rocket pin?
No, I'm good, because I think it may be time to give people proof of life on Chungus.
Yeah.
Some context for everybody who doesn't frequent our 2 usual streams. We have a sourdough starter, and his name is Chungus. And you will have seen the Chungus emote in the chat in several places, I'm quite sure. Chungus has fans, and he is a good-looking boy, in fairness. You know?
Describe the line on him.
Oh yes, this shows how high he's got. Because with a sourdough starter, it's actually very easy to do and kind of easy to maintain. You just have to feed them every couple of days. And what happens is that the microbes inside there, is it microbes or bacteria? I can never remember.
It's yeast.
Yeast. The yeast yeets itself upwards, literally, and feeds and causes the flour and water solution that it's in to expand. So the high line on here is where he got to when he was fully expanded. Now he's dipped back a little bit because we're going to feed him again in a couple of days. Yes, the boy will be fed, I assure you. And he knows that you will love him. And he's very happy about his emoticon, believe me.
And this is a very good time to remind folks who may have sourdough starters to also confirm proof of life on them as well.
Yeah, it is generally a pretty good call, folks, all things considered. So yeah, Chungus is in good shape. We stream twice a week in addition to this. The first is Wednesday nights, which is when we normally do the bedtime stories. And the second is Sunday morning, where we have a couple of very chill hours playing a relaxing kind of ambient video game or two, drinking coffee, and often bacon happens. It's pretty great. You should come along. We would love to see you. And that's pretty much what's it with me this week, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what's been going on.
Cool. The story. I'm going to be reading a piece for you, and I'm going to step across to the correct title card now. I love the transition so much, so much. I'm going to be reading a piece for you today called The Horror of the Heights by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Yes, that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is one of the very few, in fact, this may be the only piece of horror he ever wrote. He did a bunch of science fiction, and I actually talk about that, the Twitter thread that we've got for you after the show. But this story is very formative for me. I first read it very young in a very rickety, windy house living on an island made entirely of rain. And it was one of the things which steered me very hard towards the horror fiction, which is now a sizable portion of my day job. So, with that in mind, I just want to remind you about the content warnings.
There is a request in the chat to know if this story is true.
Of course it's true. Every story I tell you is true. Although that does remind me, welcome everybody. I'm so happy to have you all here. Magnus Archives and Rusty Quill fans, Pseudopod fans, friends from the Isle of Man, friends from York, friends from America. I am incredibly humbled and delighted that you're choosing to spend a couple of hours of your Sunday listening to me talk. So thank you so much for that. And yes, content warnings, blood, vertigo, possible accents, and wide open spaces. This is why the board behind me says don't look up, and you're about to find out exactly why. So, if everybody's ready, I will jump on in. The Horror of the Heights by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The idea that the extraordinary narrative, which has been called the Joyce Armstrong fragment, is an elaborate practical joke, evolved by some person cursed by a perverted and sinister sense of humour, has now been abandoned by all who have examined the matter. The most macabre and imaginative of plotters would hesitate before linking his morbid fancies with the unquestioned and tragic facts which reinforce the statement. Though the assertions contained in it are amazing, even monstrous, it is nonetheless forcing itself upon the general intelligence that they are true, and that we must readjust our ideas to the new situation. This world of ours appears to be separated by a slight and precarious margin of safety from a most singular and unexpected danger. I will endeavour in this narrative, which reproduces the original document in its necessarily somewhat fragmentary form, to lay before the reader the whole of the facts up to date, prefacing my statement by saying that if there be any who doubt the narrative of Joyce Armstrong, there can be no question at all as to the facts concerning Lieutenant Myrtle, Royal Navy, and Mr. Hay Connor, who undoubtedly met their fate in the manner described. The Joyce Armstrong fragment was found in the field which is called Lower Aycock, lying 1 mile to the westward of the village of Withyham, upon the Kent and Sussex border. It was on the 15th of September last that an agricultural labourer, one James Flynn, in the employment of Matthew Dodd, farmer, of the Chauntry Farm in Withyham, perceived a briar pipe lying near the footpath which skirts the hedge in Lower Aycock. A few paces farther on, he picked up a pair of broken binocular glasses. Finally, among some nettles in the ditch, he caught sight of a flat, canvas-backed book, which proved to be a notebook with detachable leaves, some of which had come loose and were fluttering along the base of the hedge. There he collected, but some, including the first, were never recovered, and leave a deplorable hiatus in this all too important statement. The notebook was taken by the labourer to his master, who in turn showed it to Dr. J.H. Atherton of Artfield. This gentleman at once recognised the need for an expert examination, and the manuscript was forwarded to the Aero Club in London, where it now lies. The first 2 pages of the manuscript are missing. There is also one torn away at the end of the narrative, although none of these affect the general coherence of the story. It is conjectured that the missing opening is concerned with the record of Mr. Joyce Armstrong's qualifications as an aeronaut, which can be gathered from other sources and are admitted to be unsurpassed among the air pilots of England. For many years, he has been looked upon as among the most daring and the most intellectual of flying men, a combination which has enabled him to both invent and test several new devices, including the common gyroscopic attachment, which is known by his name. The main body of the manuscript is written neatly in ink, but the last few lines are in pencil, and are so ragged as to be hardly legible. Exactly, in fact, as they might be expected to appear if scribbled off hurriedly from the seat of a moving aeroplane. There are, it may be added, several stains, both on the last page and on the outside cover, which have been pronounced by the Home Office experts to be blood. Probably human, certainly mammalian. The fact that something closely resembling the organism of malaria was discovered in this blood, and that Joyce Armstrong is known to have suffered from intermittent fever, is a remarkable example of the new weapons which modern science has placed in the hands of our detectives. And now, a word as to the personality of this epoch, of the author of this epoch-making statement. Joyce Armstrong, according to the few friends who really knew something of the man, was a poet and a dreamer, as well as a mechanic and an inventor. He was a man of considerable wealth, much of which he had spent in the pursuit of his aeronautical hobby. He had 4 private aeroplanes in his hangar near Devizes, and is said to have made no fewer than 170 ascents in the course of the last year. He was a retiring man, had dark moods, in which he would avoid the society of his fellows. Captain Dangerfield, who knew him better than anyone, says there were times when his eccentricity threatened to develop into something more serious. His habit of carrying a shotgun with him in his aeroplane was one manifestation of this. Another was the morbid effect which the fall of Lieutenant Myrtle had upon his mind. Myrtle, who was attempting the height record, fell from an altitude of something over 30,000 feet. Horrible to narrate, his head was entirely obliterated, though his body and limbs preserved their configuration. At every gathering of airmen, Joyce Armstrong, according to Dangerfield, would ask with an enigmatic smile, "And where, pray, is Myrtle's head?" On another occasion, after dinner, at the mess of the flying school on Salisbury Plain, he started a debate as to what will be the most permanent danger which airmen will have to encounter. Having listened to successive opinions as to air pockets, faulty construction, overbanking, he ended by shrugging his shoulders and refusing to put forward his own views, though he gave the impression that they differed from any advanced by his companions. It is worth remarking that after his own complete disappearance, it was found that his private affairs were arranged with a precision which may show that he had a strong premonition of disaster. With these essential explanations, I will now give the narrative exactly as it stands, beginning at page 3 of the blood-soaked notebook. Nevertheless, when I dined at Rheims with Caselli and Gustave Raymond, I found that neither of them was aware of any particular danger in the higher layers of the atmosphere. I did not actually say what was in my thoughts, but I got so near to it that if they had any corresponding idea, they could not have failed to express it. But then they are 2 empty, vainglorious fellows, with no thought beyond seeing their silly names in the newspaper. It is interesting to note that neither of them had ever been much beyond the 20,000-foot level. Of course, men have been higher than this, both in balloons and in the ascent of mountains. It must be well above that point that the aeroplane enters the danger zone, always presuming that my premonitions are correct. Aeroplaning has been with us for more than 20 years, and one might well ask, why should this peril be only revealing itself in our day? The answer is obvious. In the old days of weak engines, when 100 horsepower gnome or green was considered ample for every need, the flights were very restricted. Now that 300 horsepower is the rule, rather than the exception, visits to the upper layers have become easier, more common. Some of us can remember how in our youth, Garros made a worldwide reputation by attaining 19,000 feet, and it was considered a remarkable achievement to fly over the Alps. Our standard now has been immeasurably raised, and there are 20 high flights for one in former years. Many of them have been undertaken with impunity. The 30,000-foot level has been reached time after time with no discomfort, beyond cold and asthma. What does this prove? A visitor might descend upon this planet 1,000 times and never once see a tiger, yet tigers exist. And if he chanced to come down into a jungle, he might be devoured. There are jungles of the upper air, and there are worse than tigers which inhabit them. I believe, in time, we will map these jungles accurately out. Even at the present moment, I could name 2 of them. One of them lies over the Pau-Biarritz district of France. Another is just over my head as I write in my house in Wiltshire. I rather think there is a third above the Homburg-Wiesbaden district. It was the disappearance of the airmen that first set me thinking. Of course, everyone said they had fallen into the sea, but that did not satisfy me at all. First, there was Verrier in France. His machine was found near Bayonne, but they never got his body. There was the case of Baxter, also, who vanished, though his engine and some of the iron fixings were found in a wood in Leicestershire. In that case, Dr. Middleton of Amesbury, who was watching the flight with a telescope, declares that just before the clouds obscured the view, he saw the machine, which was at an enormous height, suddenly rise perpendicularly upwards in a succession of jerks in a manner that he would have thought to be impossible. That was the last anyone saw of Baxter. Oh, there was a correspondence in the papers, but it never led to anything. There were several other similar cases, and then there was the death of Hay Connor. What a cackle there was about an unsolved mystery of the air. What columns in the halfpenny papers, and yet how little was ever done to get to the bottom of the business. He came down in a tremendous volplan from a height. He never got off his machine. He died in his pilot's seat. Died of what? Heart disease, said the doctors. Rubbish. Hay Connor's heart was as sound as mine is. What did Venables say? Venables was the only man who was at his side when he died. He said that he was shivering. He said that he looked like a man who had been badly scared. Died of fright, said Venables, but could not imagine what he was frightened about. Only said one word to Venables, which sounded like monstrous. They could make nothing of that at the inquest. I could make something of it. Monsters. That was the last word of poor Harry Hay Connor, and he did die of fright, just as Venables thought. And then there was Myrtle's head. Do you really believe, does anybody really believe that a man's head could be driven clean into his body by the force of a fall? Well, perhaps it may be possible, but I, for one, have never believed that it was so with Myrtle. And the grease upon his clothes, all slimy with grease, said somebody at the inquest. Odd that nobody got thinking after that. I did. But then, I had been thinking for a good long time. I've made 3 ascents. How Dangerfield used to chaff me about my shotgun, but I've never been high enough. Now, With this new light Paul Verona machine and its 175 rover, I should easily touch the 30,000 tomorrow. I'll have a shot at the record. Maybe I shall have a shot at something else as well. Of course it's dangerous. If a fellow wants to avoid danger, he had best keep out of flying altogether and subside finally into flannel slippers and a dressing gown. But I will visit the air jungle tomorrow, and if there's anything there, I shall know it. If I return, I'll find myself a bit of a celebrity. If I don't, this notebook may explain what I am trying to do and how I lost my life in doing it. But no drivel about accidents or mysteries, if you please. I chose my Paul Verona monoplane for the job. There's nothing like a monoplane when real work is to be done. Beaumont found that out in very early days. For one thing, it doesn't mind damp, and the weather looks as if we should be in the clouds all the time. It's a bonny little model, answers my hand like a tender-mouthed horse. The engine is a 10-cylinder rotary rover working up to 175. It has all the modern improvements: enclosed fuselage, high curved landing skids, brakes, gyroscopic steadiers, and 3 speeds, worked by an alteration of the angle of the planes upon the Venetian blind principle. I took a shotgun with me, and a dozen cartridges, filled with buckshot. You should have seen the face of Perkins, my old mechanic, when I directed him to put them in. He was dressed like an Arctic explorer, with 2 jerseys under my overalls, thick socks inside my padded boots, a storm cap with flaps, my talc goggles. It was stifling outside the hangars, but I was going for the summit of the Himalayas, and I had to dress for the part. Perkins knew there was something on and implored me to take him with me. Perhaps I should, if I were using the biplane, but a monoplane is a one-man show. If you want to get the last foot of life out of it. Of course I took an oxygen bag, but the man who goes for the altitude record without one will either be frozen or smothered, or both. I had a good look at the planes, the rudder bar, and the elevating lever before I got in. Everything was in order, so far as I could see, and then I switched on my engine and found that she was running very sweetly. When they let her go, she rose almost at once upon the lowest speed. I circled my home field once or twice, just to warm her up, and then with a wave to Perkins and the others, I flattened out my planes and put her on her highest. She skimmed, like a swallow, downwind for 8 or 10 miles, until I turned her nose up a little, and she began to climb in a great spiral for the cloud bank above me. It's all important to rise slowly and adapt yourself to the pressure as you go. It was a close, warm day for an English September, and there was the hush and heaviness of impending rain. Now and then there came sudden puffs of wind from the southwest, one of them so gusty and unexpected that it caught me napping, turned me half round for an instant. I remember the time when gusts and whirls and air pockets used to be things of danger before we learned to put an overmastering power into our engines. Just as I reached the cloud banks, with the altimeter marking 3,000, down came the rain. My word, how it poured. It drummed upon my wings and lashed upon my face, blurring my glasses so that I could hardly see. I got down onto a low speed, for it's painful to travel against it. As I got higher, it became hail, and I had to turn tail to it. One of my cylinders was out of action. Dirty plug, I should imagine. But still, I was rising steadily, with plenty of power. After a bit, the trouble passed, whatever it was, and I heard the full, deep-throated purr, the 10, singing as one. That's where the beauty of our modern silencers comes in. We can at last control our engines by ear. How they squeal and squeak and sob when they're in trouble. All those cries for help were wasted in the old days when every sound was swallowed up by the monotonous racket of the machine. If only the early aviators could come back to see the beauty and perfection of the mechanism which has been bought at the cost of their lives. About 9:30, I was nearing the clouds. Down below me, all blurred and shadowed with rain, lay the vast expanse of Salisbury Plain. Half a dozen flying machines were doing hack work at the 1,000-foot level, looking like little black swallows against the green background. I dare say they were wondering what I was doing up in Cloudland. Suddenly, a grey curtain drew across beneath me, and the wet folds of vapours were swirling round my face. It was clammily cold and miserable, but I was above the hailstorm, and that was something gained. The cloud was as dark and thick as a London fog, and in my anxiety to get clear, I cocked her nose up until the automatic alarm bell rang, and I actually began to slide backwards. My sopped and dripping wings had made me heavier than I thought, but presently I was in lighter cloud and soon had cleared the first layer. There was a second, opal-coloured and fleecy, at a great height above my head. A white, unbroken ceiling above, a dark, unbroken floor below, with the monoplane labouring upward upon a vast spiral between them. It is deadly lonely in these cloud spaces. Once a great flight of some small water birds went past me, flying very fast to the westwards. A quick whir of their wings, their musical cry was cheery to my ear. I fancy that they were teal, but I am a wretched zoologist. Now that we humans have become birds, we must really learn to know our brethren by sight. The wind down beneath me whirled and swayed the broad cloud plain. Once a giant eddy formed in it, a whirlpool of vapour, and through it, as down a funnel, I caught a sight of the distant world. A large white biplane was passing at a vast depth beneath me. I fancy it was the morning mail service betwixt Bristol and London. Then the drift swirled inwards again, and the great solitude was unbroken. Just after 10, I touched the lower edge of the upper cloud stratum. It consisted of fine diaphanous vapour drifting swiftly from the westwards. The wind had been steadily rising all this time, and it was now blowing a sharp breeze, 28 an hour by my gauge. Already it was very cold, although my altimeter only marked 9,000. The engines were working beautifully, and we went droning steadily upwards. The cloud bank was thicker than I had expected, but at last it thinned out into a golden mist before me, and then in an instant I had shot out from it, and there was an unclouded sky, and a brilliant sun above my head, all blue and gold above, all shining silver below. One vast, glimmering plain, as far as my eyes could reach. It was 10:15, and the barograph needle pointed, it was 10:15, and the barograph needle pointed to 12,800. Up I went, and up, my ears concentrated upon the deep purring of my motor, my eyes busy always with the watch, the revolution indicator, the petrol lever, and the oil pump. No wonder aviators are said to be a fearless race. With so many things to think of, there is no time to trouble about oneself. About this time, I noted how unreliable the compass is when above a certain height from Earth. At 15,000 feet, mine was pointing east and a point south. The sun and the wind gave me my true bearings. I had hoped to reach an eternal stillness in those high altitudes, but with every 1,000 feet of ascent, the gale grew stronger. My machine groaned and trembled in every joint and rivet as she faced it, and swept away like a sheet of paper when I banked her on the turn, skimming down wind at a greater pace, perhaps, than ever mortal man has moved. Yet I had always to turn again and tack up in the wind's eye, for it was not merely a height record that I was after. By all my calculations, it was above Little Wiltshire that my air jungle lay, and all my labour might be lost if I struck the outer layers at some point. When I reached the 19,000-foot level, which was about midday, the wind was so severe that I looked with some anxiety to the stays of my wings, expecting momentarily to see them snap or slacken. I even cast loose the parachute behind me and fastened its hook into the ring of my leathern belt so as to be ready for the worst. Now was the time when a bit of skimped work by the mechanic is paid for by the life of the aeronaut. But she held together. Every cord and strut was humming and vibrating like so many harp strings, and it was glorious to see how, for all the beating and the buffeting, she was still the conqueror of nature and the mistress of the sky. There is surely something divine in man himself, that he should rise so superior to the limitations which creation seemed to impose. Rise, too, by such unselfish, heroic devotion as this air conquest has shown. Talk of human degeneration. When has such a story as this been written in the annals of our race? These were the thoughts in my head as I climbed that monstrous, inclined plane, with the wind sometimes beating in my face, sometimes whistling behind my ears, while the cloud land beneath me fell away to such a distance that the folds and hummocks of silver had all smoothed out into one flat, shining plain. But suddenly I had a horrible and unprecedented experience. I have known before what it is to be in what our neighbours have called a tourbillon, but never on such a scale as this. That huge, sweeping river of wind of which I have spoken had, as it appears, whirlpools within it, which were as monstrous as itself. Without a moment's warning, I was dragged suddenly into the heart of one. I spun round for a minute or two with such velocity I almost lost my senses, and then fell, suddenly, left wing foremost, down the vacuum funnel in the centre. I dropped like a stone and lost nearly 1,000 feet. It was only my belt that kept me in my seat, and the shock and breathlessness left me hanging half insensible over the side of the fuselage. But I am always capable of a supreme effort. It is my one great merit as an aviator. I was conscious that the descent was slower. The whirlpool was a cone, not a funnel, and I had come to the apex. With a terrific wrench, throwing my weight all to one side, I levelled my planes and brought her head away from the wind. In an instant, I had shot out of the eddies and was skimming down the sky. Then, shaken but victorious, I turned her nose up and began once more my steady grind up the spiral. I took a large sweep to avoid the danger spot of the whirlpool, and soon I was safely above it. Just after 1 o'clock, I was at 21,000 feet above sea level. And to my great joy, I had topped the gale, and with every 100 feet of ascent, the air grew stiller. On the other hand, it was very, very cold, and I was conscious of that peculiar nausea which goes with rarefaction of the air. For the first time, I unscrewed the mouth of my oxygen bag and took an occasional whiff of the glorious gas. I could feel it running like a cordial through my veins, and I was exhilarated almost to the point of drunkenness. I shouted and sang as I soared upwards into the cold, still, outer world. It is very clear to me that the insensibility which came upon Glacier, and to a lesser degree upon Coxwell, when in 1862 they ascended in a balloon to the height of 30,000 feet, was due to the extreme speed with which a perpendicular ascent is made. Doing it at an easy gradient, accustoming oneself to the lessened barometric pressure by slow degrees, means there are no such dreadful symptoms. At the same great height, I found that even without my oxygen inhaler, I could breathe without undue distress. It was bitterly cold, however, and my thermometer was at 0 Fahrenheit. At 1:30, I was nearly 7 miles above the surface of the earth, and still ascending steadily. I found, however, that the rarefied air was giving markedly less support to my planes, and that my angle of ascent had to be considerably lowered in consequence. It was already clear that even with my light weight and strong engine power, there was a point in front of me where I should be held. To make matters worse, one of my sparking plugs was in trouble, and there was intermittent misfiring in the engine. My heart was heavy with the fear of failure. It was about that time that I had a most extraordinary experience. Something whizzed past me in a trail of smoke and exploded with a loud hissing sound, sending forth a cloud of steam. For the instant I could not imagine what had happened. Then I remembered. The earth is forever being bombarded by meteor stones, and would be hardly uninhabitable were they not in nearly every case turned to vapour in the outer layers of the atmosphere. Then I remembered. The earth is forever being bombarded by meteor stones, and would be hardly inhabitable were they not in nearly every case turned to vapour in the outer layers of the atmosphere. Here is a new danger for the high-altitude man, for 2 others passed me when I was nearing the 40,000-foot mark. I cannot doubt that at the edge of the earth's envelope, the risk would be a very real one. My barograph needle marked 41,300 feet, when I was aware I could go no further. Physically, The strain was not yet greater than I could bear, but my machine had reached its limit. The attenuated air gave no firm support to the wings, and the least tilt developed into side-slip, while she seemed sluggish on her controls. Possibly, had the engine been at its best, another 1,000 feet might have been within our capacity, but it was still misfiring, and 2 out of the 10 cylinders were now out of action. If I had not already reached the zone for which I was searching, then I should never see it upon this journey. But was it not possible that I had attained it? Soaring in circles like a monstrous hawk upon the 40,000-foot level, I let the monoplane guide herself, and with my Mannheim glass I made a careful observation of my surroundings. The heavens were perfectly clear. There was no indication of those dangers that I had imagined. I have said I was soaring in circles. It struck me suddenly that I would do well to take a wider sweep and open up a new air tract. If the hunter entered an earth jungle, he would drive through it if he wished to find his game. My reasoning had led me to believe the air jungle, which I imagined lay somewhere over Wiltshire, would be to the south and west of me. I took my bearings from the sun, for the compass was hopeless, and no trace of earth was to be seen, nothing but the distant silver cloud plain. However, I got my direction as best I might, and kept her head straight to the mark. I reckoned that my petrol supply would not last for more than another hour or so, but I could afford to use it to the last drop, since a single magnificent volplan could at any time take me to the earth. Suddenly, I was aware of something new. The air in front of me had lost its crystal clearness. It was full of long, ragged wisps of something, which I can only compare to very fine cigarette smoke. It hung about in wreaths and coils, turning and twisting slowly in the sunlight. As the monoplane shot through it, I was aware of a faint taste of oil on my lips, and there was a greasy scum upon the woodwork of the machine. Some infinitely fine organic matter appeared to be suspended in the atmosphere. There was no life there. It was diffuse, extending for many square acres and then fringing off into the void. No, it was not life. But might it be the remains of life? Above all, might it not be the food of life, of monstrous life? Even as the humble grease of the ocean is the food for the mighty whale. The thought was in my mind when my eyes looked upwards, and I saw the most wonderful vision man has ever seen. Can I hope to convey it to you as I saw it myself last Thursday? Conceive a jellyfish, such as sails in our summer seas, bell-shaped and of enormous size, far larger, I should judge, than the dome of St. Paul's. It was of a light pink colour, veined with a delicate green, but the whole huge fabric so tenuous that it was but a fairy outline against the dark blue sky. It pulsated with a delicate and regular rhythm, and from it there hung 2 long, drooping green tentacles, which swayed slowly backwards and forwards. This gorgeous vision passed gently with noiseless dignity over my head, as light and fragile as a soap bubble, and drifted upon its stately way. I had half turned my monoplane, that I might look after this beautiful creature, when, in a moment, I found myself amidst a perfect fleet of them, of all sizes, but none so large as the first. Some were quite small, but the majority about as big as an average balloon, and with much the same curvature at the top. There was in them a delicacy of texture and colouring which reminded me of the finest Venetian glass. Pale shades of pink and green were the prevailing tints, but all had a lovely iridescence where the sun shimmered through their dainty forms. Some hundreds of them drifted past me, a wonderful fairy squadron of strange argosies of the sky. Creatures whose forms and substance were so attuned to these pure heights that one could not conceive anything so delicate within actual sight or sound of the earth. But soon, my attention was drawn to a new phenomenon, the serpents of the outer air. These were long, thin, fantastic coils of vapour-like material, which turned and twisted with great speed, flying round and round at such a pace that the eyes could hardly follow them. Some of these ghost-like creatures were 20 or 30 feet long, but it was difficult to tell their girth, for their outline was so hazy that it seemed to fade away into the air around them. These air snakes were of a very light grey or smoke colour with some darker lines within, which gave the impression of a definite organism. One of them whisked past my very face, and I was conscious of a cold, clammy contact, but their composition was so insubstantial that I could not connect them with any thought of physical danger. No more than the beautiful bell-like creatures, at any rate. There was no more solidity in their frames than in the floating spume from a broken wave. But a more terrible experience was in store for me. Floating downwards from a great height, there came a purplish patch of vapour, small as I saw at first, but rapidly enlarging as it approached me, until it appeared to be hundreds of square feet in size. Though fashioned of some transparent, jelly-like substance, it was nonetheless of much more definite outline and solid consistence than anything which I had seen before. There were more traces, too, of a physical organisation, especially two vast, shadowy circular plates upon either side, which may have been eyes, and also a perfectly solid white projection between them, which was as curved and cruel as the beak of a vulture. The whole aspect of this monster was formidable and threatening, and it kept changing its colour from a very light mauve to a dark, angry purple, so thick that it cast a shadow as it drifted between my monoplane and the sun. On the upper curve of its huge body there were three great projections which I can only describe as enormous bubbles, and I was convinced as I looked at them that they were charged with some extremely light gas, which served to buoy up the misshapen and semi-solid mass in the rarefied air. The creature moved swiftly along, keeping pace easily with the monoplane, and for 20 miles or more it formed my horrible escort, hovering over me like a bird of prey waiting to pounce. Its method of progression, done so swiftly that it was not easy to follow, was to throw out a long, glutinous streamer in front of it, which in turn seemed to draw forward the rest of the writhing body. So elastic and gelatinous was it that never for 2 successive minutes was it the same shape, and yet each change made it more threatening and loathsome than the last. I knew that it meant mischief. Every purple flush of its hideous body told me so. The vague, goggling eyes which were turned always upon me were cold and merciless in their viscid hatred. I dipped the nose of my monoplane downwards to escape it, and as I did so, as quick as a flash, there shot out a long tentacle from this mass of floating blubber, and it fell as light and sinuous as a whiplash across the front of my machine. There was a loud hiss as it lay for a moment across the hot engine and whisked itself into the air again, while the huge flat body drew itself together as if in sudden pain. I dipped to a vol peak, but again a tentacle fell over the monoplane and was shorn off by the propeller as easily as it might have cut through a smoke wreath. A long, gliding, sticky, serpent-like coil came from behind and caught me round the waist, dragging me out of the fuselage. I tore at it, my fingers sinking into the smooth, glue-like substance, and for an instant I disengaged myself, only to be caught round the boot by another coil, which gave me a jerk that tilted me almost onto my back. As I fell over, I blazed off both barrels of my gun, though indeed it was like attacking an elephant with a pea-shooter to imagine any human weapon would cripple that mighty bulk. And yet I aimed better than I knew, for with a loud report, one of the great blisters upon the creature's back exploded with the puncture of the buckshot. It was very clear that my conjecture was right, and these vast clear bladders were distended with some lifting gas, for in an instant the huge cloud-like body turned sideways, writhing desperately to find its balance, while the white beak snapped and gaped in horrible fury. But already I had shot away on the steepest glide I dared to attempt, my engine still full on, the flying propeller and the force of gravity shooting me downwards. Far behind me, I saw a dull, purplish smudge, growing swiftly smaller and merging into the blue sky behind it. I was safe. I was out of the deadly jungle of the air. Once out of danger, I throttled my engine, for nothing tears a machine to pieces quicker than running on full power from a height. It was a glorious spiral volplan from nearly 8 miles of altitude, first to the level of the silver cloud bank, then to that of the storm cloud beneath it, and finally, in beating rain, to the surface of the earth. I saw the Bristol Channel beneath me as I broke from the clouds, but having still some petrol in my tank, I got 20 miles inland before I found myself stranded in a field half a mile from the village of Ashcombe. There I got 3 tins of petrol from a passing motor car, and at 10 minutes past 6 that evening I alighted gently in my own home meadow at Devizes after such a journey as no mortal upon earth has ever yet taken and lived to tell the tale. I have seen the beauty, and I have seen the horror of the heights. And greater beauty, or greater horror than that, is not within the ken of man. And now it is my plan to go again before I give my results to the world. My reason for this is that I must surely have something to show by way of proof before I lay such a tale before my fellow men. It is true that others will soon follow and will confirm what I have said, and yet I should wish to carry conviction from the first. Those lovely iridescent bubbles of the air should not be hard to capture. They drift slowly upon their way, and the swift monoplane could intercept their leisurely course. It is likely enough that they would dissolve in the heavier layers of the atmosphere, and that some small heap of amorphous jelly might be all that I should bring to earth with me. And yet, something there would surely be by which I could substantiate my story. Yes, I will go, even if I run a risk by doing so. Those purple horrors would not seem to be too numerous. It is probable that I shall not see one. If I do, I shall dive at once. At the worst, there is always the shotgun, and my knowledge of... Here a page of the manuscript is unfortunately missing. On the next page is written, in large, straggling writing, 43,000 feet. I shall not see earth again. They are beneath me. 3 of them. God help me, it is a dreadful death to die. Such in its entirety is the Joyce Armstrong statement. Of the man, nothing has since been seen. Pieces of his shattered monoplane have been picked up in the preserves of Mr. Bud Lushington upon the borders of Kent and Sussex, within a few miles of the spot where the notebook was discovered. If the unfortunate aviator's theory is correct, that this air jungle, as he called it, existed only over the southwest of England, then it would seem that he had fled from it at the full speed of his monoplane, but had been overtaken and devoured by these horrible creatures at some spot in the upper atmosphere, above the place where the grim relics were found. The picture of that monoplane skimming down the sky, nameless terrors flying as swiftly beneath it and cutting it off always from the earth while they gradually closed in, is one upon which a man who valued his sanity would prefer not to dwell. There are many, as I am aware, who still jeer at the facts that I have here set down, but even they must admit that Joyce Armstrong has disappeared, and I will commend to them his own words. This notebook may explain what I am trying to do, and how I lost my life in doing it, but no drivel about accidents or mysteries, if you please. And that is the horror of the heights. Chat, thank you so much for that. At various points I was looking across and I saw all the stuff about wifing the sky snakes. I also saw the Skygers, which are very good.
Hey, you're back early. Sky's haunted. What? Cock shotgun.
Sky's haunted.
I put a couple of them in the document for you.
Brilliant, thank you. I love this story, and I love this story on 3 or 4 really nerdy levels. Firstly, I love the metatextuality of it, which this is what my training is in. Basically pulling bits of literature apart like Tony Stark does with Iron Man armors. Metatextuality is a form of intertextual discourse in which one text makes critical commentary on another. The other thing which I was always taught that it did was use the narrative geography of a piece of fiction as part of that fiction. And in this instance, It's the idea of pushing the envelope. That this incredibly arrogant Englishman decides that the best possible thing he can do is go and fight the sky tigers in the sky jungle. Barely survives and goes, oh, it's probably fine. There's only one of them. I'll go back. And just gets horribly killed to death as a result. And I love how the first 3/4 of the story are, as so many of you found, a Scot. Yes, we have. We actually did this, frankly, horrifying amount of time ago. As so many of you found, the opening 3/4 of this are actually really soothing, as he just explores and does wonderful kind of pseudo Star Trek type stuff, and then the horror begins. And as the idea of him pushing past the envelope of what the plane can do, and pushing past the envelope of what the story can do, turns into, and there is this awful, awful thing waiting for him on the other side of that. I love that. I love stories that mirror tone and format in the way that this does. I mean, this is I made a note here. This is exploration as lore, the truth as bait. You may not be able to take the sky from me, but that's only because the sky is attempting to eat my face, and that's pretty much what we have here. And it all comes down to the tension that's generated in that back 25% or so. That tension, that moment where you realise that calls are coming from inside the house, or in this case, the sky shark is beneath you. And that's why I love this story, the way that it pushes out past one genre, touches the edge of another, and sacrifices itself for that moment of alien, absolute, terrible beauty. If any of you have seen the movie version of The Mist, there is a moment, you'll know the moment I'm talking about. And if you haven't, it's really worth tracking down. There's a moment right at the very end with, I believe the canonical term for them is lobstrosities. The huge kind of 1,000-story tall monsters that just stomp through the mist, which feels exactly like this. That sense of something alien and impossible that moves into eye contact, and if you're very, very lucky, moves away again.
Or that you're so small it doesn't even notice you.
Or that you're so small that it doesn't even notice you. I love that stuff. And this is my signature thing, and this is something which Pseudopod staff and Pseudopod listeners will know. I love finding hope in horror, and there's hope in this story too. The lead may have died in an unspeakably horrible way, but he's made it clear that death is to be investigated and studied. In being seen, he is himself seen, and soon this aerial veldt is going to be mapped. Life, like everybody's favourite chaotician says, finds a way. And sometimes so do bloody-minded English aviators who really should know better. The hope here is in exploration and discovery. The potential horror that follows it is in exploitation. But that's another story, and unfortunately one that Conan Doyle never got to. I do enjoy thinking about it, though. I love this story. It terrified me as a kid, and it entrances me now. And I'm incredibly happy that I got to share it with you. So thank you for that.
In the chat about lobstrosities being related to Dark Tower?
Yes, they show up in, I think, the second book of the Dark Tower series, too.
Nice. Very metatextual.
Very. Oh, also, now is probably a time for a really, really horrible confession, which is this story actually inspired me to write my first ever novel. This was about a decade and a half ago, and I did it one NaNoWriMo to see if I could, and I have this novel which friends of mine read at the time and went, you could have handed this to me with no name on it and I would have said that wasn't bad. It's very me. It's, this kind of unit from Doctor Who basically show up. There's an attempt by the CIA to weaponize the sky sharks, all this kind of stuff. It is very much a trunk book. But I keep thinking about how I could untrunk it. And so keep watching the skies in a couple of years. Now, there is a thing that we do on Wednesday night. It is a thing which we always do towards the end of the show. I was actually thinking about this earlier, and I realised that that the Wednesday night stream is a horror sandwich. We start with something funny, we do horrifying nightmare fuel, and then we finish with something lighthearted. So I call it brain sorbet. It's a way to kind of wash the disturbing stuff out.
Hold on a second, there's a question. What's a trunk book?
Oh, a trunk book, sorry. A trunk book is a technical term for when you've written a book that you can't sell. or that you feel you isn't ready to try and go out and sell.
It needs to sit and think about what
It needs to sit. It literally needs to sit and think about what it's done. And this one is a trunk book for me. I actually have one which isn't a trunk book and which will shortly be going out in front of people. But this one will be another couple of years before it does. I do love the inciting incident though. I did this whole thing with a UFO sighting at one of the RAF bases outside York. And at the same time, there's a journalist in town who's called to investigate the death of someone on York Minster, except they're on it, they haven't fallen off it, and they have frostbite, and they may have bite marks, and it is a lot. It is an awful lot. I wrote it towards the end of my time in Yorkshire, and you could tell because there are several places where I had no fun at all, which get very destroyed. I could actually be persuaded to read some of it for you, but not for a few months.
Yeah, talk about why for a second.
Say what?
You want to talk about why the book is on hold right now?
Oh, yeah. Why is the book on hold? I've completely forgotten.
Because it stars police.
Yes, of course. The book which I have on hold, basically I need to take back to the shop and break down. And although, Alistair, I'm certain you've gotten this before considering your line of work, but you reading your book could be very good listening fuel. That's really kind, thank you. And I will consider that. It's called the Icarus Thread, and the initial version of it, this is the one which is going out to agents soon, is a locked room murder mystery 37,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, which deals with space elevators and the unionization of space and colossal skyscraper-sized cargo haulers and all this good stuff. And there's some really good stuff in there. I'm really proud of it. And there's just one problem. It's a police novel. And now is not a good time to be writing about the police. I mean, I don't want to get into this in a lot of detail, especially as I have 3 or 4 friends who are active duty officers in various capacities. I love that type of story. 2 of the things which taught me how to write are that type of story. But I'm acutely aware that it's very easy, and this is what I did, to go there first and go, yes, this will do. And when I went back and read it, especially in the last 3 or 4 months, the thing which I realized was there's a lot more I can do if at least one of them is not a cop. And that's what I'm working on doing now. And if I can land it, it's going to be far closer to The Expanse than anything else, in that it's this group of likable assholes on a ship which they really shouldn't have, going, oh God, what now, for basically the entire thing. And if I can nail that, I'm pretty confident I can, then it will go out on submission.
But it's a very good time to kind of reconsider first principles.
It is.
Exactly.
It is.
I think you've built enough tension in the chat now. I think everybody's ready for what comes next.
This is my favourite transition of all of them. Alex approved.
Explain what shenanigans are.
Shenanigans is the final act of our Wednesday stream. And basically what we do is take something which is Magnus Archives related. It's pretty usually Peter Lucas or Elias related, or both. And read it. And in some cases, we completely fail to keep a straight face, or in my case, a straight voice. It's been educational these last couple of weeks in particular. I've discovered that my Alex impersonation is not bad, that my Elias impersonation is profoundly disturbing, and that there is an awful lot of deeply, deeply fantastic fan fiction out there, which I've loved reading and continue to love reading. Yes, the Big Sailor Husband is back, y'all. So normally what we do is, like I say, is pull something from AO3 or Tumblr, and a lot of the time we have folks who send us stuff, and that's great. We've actually got a couple of really good ones packed away. But I was aware that this was a special occasion. You know, this is my first time ever on RQ Streams, and thank you so much for having me on, folks.
And for talking about your fiction.
And for talking about my fiction. And as a result, we wanted to do something a little special.
But we need to get a little bit of a warning about it first. And that warning is that this is fan fiction.
Yes, this is fan fiction. This is not remotely canonical in any way, shape, or form. You are welcome to headcanon it into place, but This is me speaking. This isn't Rusty Quill speaking. And with that legal boilerplate, checking in with the legal counsel in the room to see if we're clear.
Good. I think let's take a quick minute, maybe just to let everybody refill their drinks and everything.
Oh, can I use the be right back?
Do you want to use the be right back? Warn everybody first and say, hey everybody, we're going to take a break.
I have an all new continuity screen, which is basically the we'll be back in a second one. So I'm just going to use that for a minute. Just to really, really ramp this up, one of you has absolutely successfully guessed what this is. Well done. I'm going to give you another minute or so just to get squared away, and then we're going to jump on in.
You going to dramatically sip tea again?
When have I ever passed up an opportunity to dramatically sip tea? Okay, one more time before we jump in. Fan fiction, not canon. Personal headcanon is completely fine. The views expressed in this story are my own and in no way, shape or form reflect those of Rusty Quill's.
Everybody got their time marks for clipping?
All good? Okay. Peter Lucas and the Cat by Alistair Stewart. Back in the 80s, Peter Lucas owned a cat. Insofar as one can, of course, it had been a revolting thing to realise. The hairs on the back of his neck standing up as, one after another, his crew came to see him. None of them made eye contact, of course, but the interaction was still nauseating. Bags of sweat and water and sadness crammed into his suddenly too small cabin, all of them mumbling their way to the same destination via an endless, banal labyrinth of different roads. They were lonely. Peter scoffed. They didn't know loneliness. The velvet embrace of a night alone. The sodium yellow kiss of streetlights on empty, rain-slicked asphalt. The ocean, the sky. Nothing in between. Besides, of course they felt lonely. That was the plan. Their work suffered first. Decks unscrubbed, cargo unsecured, doors opened. All of them minor issues, all of them easy fixes. All of them leading to the same idea, the same realization. Unscrubbed because the crew were talking. Unsecured because the crew were distracted not by presence, but by absence. Open because that way they could hear others talking, laughing, breathing. Peter posted extra watches, docked pay, held one-on-ones. None of it worked, at least not for long. It all came to a head in the Irish Sea. A delivery that should have been simplicity itself almost got them killed. They picked up a passenger in Douglas, a haunted, intense young man who, to Peter, smelt of cordite and communion wafer. He was going where they all went in the end, and Peter took joy in both that familiarity and that distance. That night he awoke to the sound of gunfire. The woman who'd snuck aboard, they found out later, was their charge's sister. She had more blood on her hands than anyone in Peter's crew. A life scrawled in young handwriting across local history, all broken fingernails and blood clots, burning cars on waste ground, and the sound of kneecaps shattering. She had been sent to ensure that her brother didn't reach the destination on everyone's minds. A new identity, a decade of looking over his shoulder, clandestine testimony at Thames House, and sleepless nights wondering which close friends had been killed based on his words that day. Peter had no sympathy. For anyone, really. But this young man was a special case. So when he snapped awake at the sound of the gunshot, his first thought was that their passenger was more lost, perhaps, than even he had first considered. And then the second gunshot rang out, and Peter knew they were in trouble. The crew, to their credit, had followed his orders. Unless the alarm rings, lock your cabin door, wait for the all clear, but his fourth watch lead had not been so lucky. A diligent woman in her early 50s, she had been on the bridge and seen their stowaway creep across the deck. She'd followed protocol, grabbing a flare pistol and a crowbar, and had been on her way to wake Peter. She had been seen. She had been caught. He found her, clutching her wet, red stomach, slumped against the port stairs. She looked at him, and, for reasons Peter would wonder at in days to come, he showed her what he really was. She died smiling, a question long suspected, answered at the last. He stepped past her, up onto the deck. Something about the bow of a ship always attracted people. It was like drawing a line in reality, a definitive point beyond which your life would change. Stand here, watch the future arrive. Stand here, watch the past catch up with you. Their charge was on his knees, sobbing, his back to the prow. Peter watched as his sister got the confession she wanted, watched as the gun in her hand wavered, whispered to the back of her mind about what he'd done and how much he deserved it. Watched as she emptied the clip into the younger man's chest, then stepped forward into her peripheral vision. "Hello there." She turned and fired again, the click of the hammer against the empty chamber audible somehow over the waves. The engine. Her sobbing. "My name's Peter. You're on my boat. You killed one of my people." He smiled. There was an echo behind it. "I'm not happy, but I'm not angry. These things happen." He impersonated a smile. "We were all young once. Now, you're going to need to disappear. You could do that on the mainland, or," he gestured to the deck, "I do have an opening. Thanks to you." Her first act was to heave her brother's corpse overboard. None of the others helped. Peter's first act of the day was to unlock the doors and introduce the crew to their new colleague. He let them deal with the cleanup. The incident helped Peter understand the problem he faced. His crew needed something social, some glue to keep them together. For a while, it was grief. Then anger, although his new arrival acquitted herself admirably. There was a week of broken fingers and noses, the crew drinking coffee around swollen jaws. She eventually settled, as far as anyone really did on the tundra. No, there needed to be something that could fill the space he could not. Something for the crew to care about, something to close the circle of the perfect environment Peter had built for them all to be alone inside. Persistent distance, anonymized and nameless loss. The sense of an ending, but never its arrival. Peter loved that sensation. He remembered watching the moon landings, a rarity for him, given his hatred for television. The sense of community, the nauseating combined focus of billions had made him gag, but not before he'd heard Buzz Aldrin refer to the moon's sweeping void as magnificent desolation. Peter had contemplated the idea of incompleteness as destination for a long time. He'd resisted the crew's previous requests for more active socialization, even punished the few who had dependents, driving them from the ship. If the crew were incomplete, then the crew were lonely. It was that simple.
Hold on a second. We're having a broadband issue.
Oh, we are. One moment.
Hang on just a second, everybody. It looks like all of a sudden we're slowing down a lot. We're going to investigate for a second and pick this back up. I'm not quite sure what's causing it. Yes, everybody take a break for a sip of water. Everybody breathe. It's okay. It's okay.
Okay. We'll give it a couple of minutes. Because, we're getting
I'm not quite
reds
sure what's
and oranges,
happening.
aren't we?
Let's... Why don't you go to that other tab there? Hang on a second, everybody. Why don't we go to technical difficulties for a second? We'll be right back.
We'll be right back, folks. And we're back. I've always wanted to say that. We'll restart from... Guys, he smiled when he saw predictions. Yes, he did. We will roll this back a few lines.
There we go.
The incident helped Peter understand the problem he faced. His crew needed something social, some glue to keep them together. For a while, it was grief, then anger, although his new arrival acquitted himself admirably. There was a week of broken fingers and noses, the crew drinking coffee through swollen jaws. She eventually settled, as far as anyone really did on the tundra. No, there needed to be something else. Something that could fill the space he could not. Something for the crew to care about. Something to close the circle of the perfect environment Peter had built for them all to be alone inside. Persistent distance. Anonymized, nameless loss. The sense of an ending, but never its arrival. Peter loved that sensation. He remembered watching the moon landings, a rarity for him given his hatred for television. The sense of community, the nauseating combined focus of billions had made him gag. But not before he'd heard Buzz Aldrin refer to the moon's sweeping void as magnificent desolation. Peter had contemplated the idea of incompleteness as destination for a long time. He'd resisted the crew's previous requests for more active socialization, even punished the few who had dependents, driving them from the ship. If the crew were incomplete, then the crew were lonely. It was that simple. When the crew were lonely, they were exactly what he needed them to be. He dreamt of sodium streetlights and distant windows. He dreamt of magnificent desolation. The crew dreamed of other things. And one day, the cat arrived. Peter didn't choose it. None of the crew would admit to bringing it aboard. It was just suddenly there. A sleek, languid puddle of tabby fur that slept on the mess table in a manner so natural everyone assumed it had always been a part of the ship and the crew. Peter even caught himself moving his coffee mug one day to make sure its placement didn't inconvenience the creature. That had brought him up short. He glowered at the cat and watched as it tucked its head further under its front paws, curled into a tighter ball, and fell even further asleep. Peter took every meal in his cabin from that day. The crew became happier, more efficient. They still knew the work they did, still had the inkling of what moved above and around them, like a mammal beneath a dinosaur's feet, but the burden rested lighter on their shoulders. The tundra made more progress, took more clients. On occasion, people were even heard singing. The cat was everywhere, the engine room, the mess, the hold. There had been no rats since it had come aboard. And no easy sleep for Peter either. Introspection comes naturally to the lonely, yet it took Peter far longer than he would admit to isolate the source of his consternation. At first, he briefly entertained the notion he was jealous. The cat never visited his quarters. The cat never sat with him during meals, but that was ridiculous. His upbringing had made sure to eradicate any sense of longing or jealousy, any need for others. He was a Lucas. He was of the lonely. That was his nature and his solace. One night, looking out over the ocean, it came to him. It wasn't that he was jealous. It was that the cat, somehow, did the great work better than he did. It never sat with the same person twice or in the same place. It never showed anyone undue affection or picked a favourite among the crew. It kept to itself, interacting under polite sufferance, but sufferance nonetheless. The cat was not lonely. The cat was alone. Perfectly, effortlessly alone. It was everything Peter longed to achieve. Perhaps he was jealous. He was certainly challenged. Peter considered his options. The obvious route was unacceptable. He was lonely, not a monster. He eventually selected an easier alternative, one that may even pay off in the long run, one that would serve as a reminder of what had been taken or given, depending on where you were standing. And then the creature's removal would serve to make his crew less than whole. It was perfect, elegant, cruel in the exact way he loved. His newest crew member had settled, but never quite settled in. She ate alone, worked jobs that required as little contact with the others as possible. He respected that. In different circumstances, he could have used that, shaped her further, but she had another role to play. He arranged for the Tundra's route to make a clandestine midnight stop at Lambay for essential repairs, where Peter knew the draw of her old stomping grounds would prove irresistible. He inspected her cabin after their departure and found her berth empty of its few possessions. And the cat. He hadn't even had to nudge her. That night, Peter tumbled into a deep and dreamless sleep for the first time in months. He still does. Aside, now and then, from the nights when he awakes, with the sense memory of a small form on the bed next to him, paying him no attention whatsoever. There you go.
Watching the chat go, Peter, don't you dare harm that cat! Don't you touch the hair on that cat's head!
Yeah,
He's an avatar of the lonely. He's not a monster.
I'm so proud of that line. That is the line I am proudest of in the whole thing. Oh.
Now tell everybody the even better news.
You mean the news about what we're doing next?
No, the fact that we're going to put this on AO3 tomorrow.
This is going live on AO3 tomorrow. It is the first, and so far only, piece of AO3 work I have, but it will go live first thing tomorrow. And I'm so happy you will like it. That was so much fun to do. Really was. We have a little bit of cleanup just before we wrap up, don't we? We have
a couple of things next.
Have a couple of things.
Yes, but I have to reopen them because I closed them on my computer thinking they may have been contributing to the problem. We have an announcement.
Yes.
But we missed something at the beginning of the stream we forgot to talk about.
With massive apologies to Mike for this, because we really should have done this up top. So just imagine really hard that I did this about an hour and a half ago. Hi, I'm Alistair. You may know me from the Rusty Quill, where I play Peter Lucas, the unsung hero of Season 4. For those of you who are new to the show, the Rusty Quill is a podcasting network and entertainment collective, which has 3 shows at present. Rusty Quill Gaming, which is a live play podcast, The Magnus Archives, which is a horror show, and Stella Firma, which is just amazingly good. I mean, it's all really good. But Stella Firma is a science fiction podcast like no other. You should just listen to all of them. They're great. RQ is an entertainment company and podcast network. They focus on audio drama. And like so many organizations like this, including my own, which is Escape Artists, which Marguerite and I co-own, RQ is powered by your donations. You can donate directly. You can subscribe on Twitch. You can donate via Patreon. Please tell your friends about these shows, because every podcast survives based on word of mouth, and we all need all the help you can get. And you can also join the Discord server.
That's right.
Fantastic. Now, Peter should be the sung hero. He'd hate that.
Well, yeah, the Crew of the Tundra singing was an Easter egg for sea shanties, just for chat, wasn't it? I do love that idea.
So, that's pretty much what we've got for you today.
But let's talk about next week.
Next Wednesday's bedtime story, and also my upcoming schedule at Worldcon.
Let's do your schedule first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Worldcon rolls from this Tuesday, and like I say, is on New Zealand time. But the times I'm about to give you are on UK time, so you can hopefully come to these. On Wednesday, we have an Escape Artists fan meetup, which is on... No, I'm misreading this horribly.
It's okay, don't worry.
I'm a fool.
So, Alistair's on a bunch of programming for Worldcon.
I'm going to do it. It's all right.
Okay.
On Tuesday the 28th at 10 p.m, we have an Escape Artists fan meetup. If you listen to any of our shows, Escape Pod, Pseudopod, Podcast, Linkcast of Wonders, do please come along. It would be great to meet you and chat. And this is all on Zoom, I believe, so it should be voice and sound.
It's through Worldcon, yeah. So if you're a Worldcon member, you'll have details on how to join. And
on Wednesday, I'm doing a reading at 10:30 p.m. BST.
At Worldcon.
At Worldcon, which is some of the non-fiction stuff that I've been nominated for Best Fan Writer for. And then, immediately after that, I will be doing the usual Wednesday night stream from about 11. And that is probably, we're still locking that one in, but that's probably going to be the same stuff. And then on Thursday at Worldcon, we both have what's called the Cafe Clutch, which is basically, you sit in the real world, you sit at a table and drink coffee and eat donuts. In reality, I'm going to sit here and drink coffee and eat donuts and talk to anyone who shows up, which should be fun. We actually both have one of those back to back. That will be at 8 p.m. Then, on Thursday, I'm appearing on the excellent Skiffy and Fanty live at 9 p.m. to discuss all kinds of stuff, including The Old Guard, the excellent new Netflix movie, and the comics that it's associated with and adapted from. And then on Friday, it's the Hugo ceremony at midnight, and I'm just
gonna wear fancy PJs and eat party food.
Fancy PJs and eat pigs in blankets. It'll be fine. It will be fine. So that's my upcoming schedule. And then a week on Wednesday, I am delighted to announce that we will be starting a complete reading of A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, which is somehow even better than the title suggests, by T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher is the vaguely absurd pen name of Ursula Vernon. In another life, she writes children's books and weird comics and has won the Hugo, Sequoia, and Ursa Major Awards, as well as a half-dozen Junior Library Guild selections. Ursula is an incredible force of nature as a human, and incredibly funny. T. Kingfisher is the name she uses when writing things for grown-ups, and when she's not writing, she's probably out in the garden trying to make eye contact with butterflies, while her husband Kevin, a man who has mission-variable sporrans, I am not joking, tends to their chickens.
Yes, there is Chicken Cam. Kevin and Ursula are both very good follows on Twitter.
So yeah, that's going to be the next couple of weeks for us.
And here's a little blurb for if you don't know what A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking is about.
Yes. 14-year-old Mona isn't like the wizards charged with defending the city. She can't control lightning or speak to water. Her familiar is a sourdough starter. And her magic only works on bread. She has a comfortable life in her aunt's bakery, making gingerbread men dance. But Mona's life is turned upside down when she finds a dead body on the bakery floor. An assassin is stalking the streets of Mona's city, preying on magic folk, and it appears that Mona is his next target. And in an embattled city suddenly bereft of wizards, the assassin may be the least of Mona's worries. And yes, we're absolutely sold on this, firstly because it's Ursula, and secondly because Chungus!
Exactly. We will put... talk about the Twitter thread you do after streams.
I do show notes after each one of our Wednesday streams, which is further background on the author and the story and some other interesting stuff. The show notes for this are 3 pages long. It's, like I say, it's all on Twitter. It's going to be links to further reading pages, links to potentially interesting stuff which is related to this. There's a movie that, if you like this story, you should really watch.
And we'll include links to Ursula / T. Kingfisher's Twitter account and a buy link for this book if you want to read it in advance as we serialize it over the Wednesday night streams. But we just thought it would be, first of all, sourdough starter familiar.
We have a question as to whether Chungus is going to be cosplaying as the starter in the story. And I think he may have to.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's such a good idea. I'm making cosplay for my sourdough starter. What am I doing?
We have a request for a wizard's hat.
I think a wizard's hat would be a very appropriate choice. All right. I shall have to do some investigation.
Okay.
And I think at this point that's about it. Tell folks where they can find you.
You can find me online at Alistair Stewart on Twitter. You can find Marguerite online at Legal Valkyrie on Twitter. My website is alistairstewart.com. You can also find the sign-up link there for my newsletter, The Full Lid, which drops every Friday at 5 p.m. And it's basically me yelling at you about how great 3 or 4 things are from that week. This one just gone, I reviewed Matt Wallace's new book, Savage Legion, which is excellent and I highly recommend.
And I won't go to bed tonight until I finish reading.
Exactly. The incredibly good trilogy of graphic novels about Senator John Lewis's life, March. And also, I run a little video interstitials between each story. And this week it was the men of The Witcher trying to do things. So if you haven't seen Henry Cavill build his first gaming PC, I've got you covered. And if you haven't seen Joey Beatty bake, technically, that's in there too. So that's where you can find me. That's where you can find Marguerite. The biggest question, of course, is when will you be able to watch RQ streams again? And that is going to be Wednesday at 5 p.m. when Anil will be starting in, I believe, on The Wolf Among Us.
Yep.
Thank you so much, folks. This has been an absolute blast. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to share one of my favourite stories with you. I will be seeing you again.
That's it.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Have a good night, everybody.